Do we need to point out that next week is a crazy week? Well, I hope not, but just in case you didn't know, next week is a crazy week. So this has been such a big year for gold. We know about the historical central bank buying coming into the year. Well, now we're looking at record overall demand. Gold investments more than doubled this past quarter. That would be year over year, and that comes out to 364 tons. That takes the total to 1,313 tons. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, well, it doesn't really need to. The institutional buying, that part is new though. Bullion-backed ETFs have been seeing prolonged outflows. That's no longer the case. If you've been waiting though for all of this to calm down so we can just get a pullback, just get a chance to buy at a discount, well, wow. You've been waiting a long time. That, or you saw last week's $50 drop in price and you got real excited because anything other than up is an interesting change lately. And speaking of interesting, next week is going to be very interesting. Now, let's not call this analysis. This is just something to be aware of. I mentioned in my last video that gold has been tracking Western investor activity again. And Western trading activity is just a little bit easier to follow because traders here tend to use gold as a safe haven asset. So if something looks scary in the near term, well, money flows into gold, price goes up. I also mentioned that we had a huge amount of data coming in this past week and next, and we didn't really get any big bombshells this past week, but we did get some of that volatility that we were expecting, and that drove gold price down. And if we thought this past week was big, well, we're going to need a new word for what comes next. Now, while we're thinking about that, Summit Metals has everything you need for gold and silver. They've got great prices, great people, fast shipping, really great prices on American Gold Eagles, by the way, but don't take my word on any of this. Be sure to check them out yourself. SummitMetals.com. So what I was saying is that next week, it's a much bigger week than last. Much, much bigger. I don't think that you can overstate how big a deal the U.S. election is for economic outlook and the price of this stuff, gold. So what we're looking at here is one of the most divisive presidential elections in U.S. history. It's going to affect everybody. On top of that, though, we also have the Fed policy meeting with the next rate decision just 2 days later, November 7th. Now, that really should be plenty of news. But on top of that, you have China piling on with an expected announcement to give its economy a shot in the arm by adding 10 trillion yuan. That's about 1.4 trillion US dollars in extra debt. And stimulus programs that add to national debt like that debase the currency and they drive inflation higher. That should seem familiar because we're seeing it happening here now. And inflation means higher commodity prices, which you have to think means higher gold and silver prices. And if all that isn't enough to keep you entertained, you have North Korea trying to remind the world they exist, inserting themselves into the Russian-Ukraine conflict. You have Israel versus Iran and the underlying threat of China versus Taiwan. So gold has a lot pushing it up right now. With all that in play, you would think gold would be taking off like a rocket. Silver too. That makes it really nice to see a pullback from the end of last week. But next week really is anybody's guess. Look, it's the kind of thing you might bet on, but probably not bet at all on because really nobody knows. Now, here's what's in my head. I just made a purchase yesterday. Gold fell $50 on the week. So for all I know, it could fall a lot more next week. It could also take off again. And most people think that's what it's going to do. They think it's going to take off. Now, if I thought I knew which way it was going, I would be betting on it because as far as catalysts go, there are some really big ones coming that could really affect prices more than a little. Now, if most people end up being wrong and it does go the other way, well, I'll be happy to buy some more. Now, none of this is saying what I think anybody else should do, but I saw a comment on an FX Empire article suggesting that gold spent 80% of its time moving sideways and 20% in rallies over the past decade. And that checks out. They went on to say that moving forward, they thought it was going to shift to 80% rallying, 20% trending sideways. That is a crazy thought to think that now gold is going to be moving 80% of the time. And moving up, to be clear. Now, that's only one person's opinion, but it's the kind of thing we've been seeing all year. And it's not been 80%, it's been more like 90%. So if you're looking at last week's $50 drop, that's this 10% of the time that gold isn't rallying. I'll be the first to say that it's still making a bet against next week's price movement because next week is a big one. Now, jumping on a small pullback is about all I can seem to hope for lately. Normally, I buy a little bit each month and then I buy more on drops. And we just aren't getting any this year. So we could say 27.35 is still expensive and buying right now is a gamble. All of that is true, but all we can't say is that gold is boring. Seeing gold outperform the S&P in a year that the S&P is also making a run is definitely not normal and not boring. May we all live in interesting times. Let's call it good there. This was a keep your eyes peeled next week kind of video. Maybe a hey, it's a calm before the storm kind of video. I don't know. Not much I can tell you other than hold on. You're going to have to take it from there. So let us know what you're up to if you're buying ahead of the week or holding out hope for a big drop. I wish I had odds there. I don't know what it'd be. 1 in 3 maybe. Let us know what you think. And then while you're in the comments, be sure to hit that like button if you found any of this interesting. Be sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on if you want to hear more on the topic. And if you're still here, thanks again for watching. I always appreciate your time. Take care.